welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are covering leadership development in 2025, insights from executives on preparing frontline to advanced leaders. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'm going to hand it over to John.
Thank you, Brooke. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm John Kupla, the Executive Director for the Center for Professional and Executive Development here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm excited to have you all with us as we hear from our featured panelists talk about leadership development. Before I introduce everyone, I'd like to share a few words about the Wisconsin School of Business Center for Professional and Executive Development, or CPED as we call it here. So CPED offers programs and certificates that will give you the current relevant skills needed to advance your career. All of our programs offer interactive learning sessions facilitated by instructors with practical business experience. CPED also partners with organizations to provide tailored or customized professional development programs, coaching, and consulting. And for more information on the center, please visit our website at uwcped.org. If you have any questions during today's webinar that you'd like to ask our panelists, you can submit those questions using either the chat function or the Q&A buttons on the bottom of the Zoom webinar screen. We'll wait till the latter part of the webinar to pose those questions to our panelists. So please submit whenever you feel you have a question or think of a question. And again, we'll take time at the end of the webinar to address those. I also want to remind everybody that the webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be made available within the next few days. So please keep an eye out for that. Feel free to share that with colleagues. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's featured panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alan Kaplan. Serving as the President and Chief Executive Officer of UW Health since May 2016, Dr. Kaplan leads the academic health system affiliated with the University of Wisconsin, overseeing multiple hospitals and a substantial team of healthcare professionals. Welcome, Dr. Kaplan. Next, Dennis Armstrong, formerly the Chief Human Resources Officer at Blaine's Farm and Fleet. Dennis currently serves as Blaine's Talent Transformation Strategist. He has an extensive background in human resources and organizational effectiveness, having held leadership roles at companies such as Vitamix, Victoria's Secret Stores, and the Limited Brands. Welcome, Dennis. And finally, I'd like to introduce Pam Rushing, appointed in June 2023 as President, Subsidiaries, and Chief Underwriting Officer at Church Mutual Insurance Company. Pam brings over 25 years of insurance industry experience, including leadership positions at the Hanover Insurance Group. Welcome, Pam. All right. Well, we're going to turn the slides off and we're going to get started with our discussion. Again, I'm really excited to have these three esteemed leaders with us today, talking about really what we should anticipate in 2025 as far as leadership development. So I'm going to start with just talking a little bit about the adaptability and innovation skills. And I want to just share a study by Korn Ferry that was done this year that highlighted that 73% of senior executives believe leadership roles will require significantly higher adaptability and innovation skills to navigate future uncertainties. So I want to pose the question, and I'll ask Dr. Kaplan to answer this first one, is what are the most critical skills you believe leaders must cultivate to thrive in this increasingly complex and uncertain business landscape of 2025?
Great.
Dr. Kaplan.
Thanks, John. And it's good to be here. And I think you'll get different answers from different people from different industries. But I would lead by saying that all the basic leadership skills of the past and the current will be the same of the future. It's the communication, it's the leading change, It is crucial conversations. However, mastering them has a higher threshold than perhaps maybe I needed 20 years ago when I entered into leadership. Today's environment's less forgiving. The stakes are higher. We're dealing with things that we didn't deal with 20 years ago. Workforce shortage at the front lines, global supply chain disruption, political and regulatory changes at a faster, a more aggressive pace, and the pace of technology. Some of the new skills that I believe are emerging is that the need to be able to juggle more critical things at one time, which requires a secondary skill, and that's the ability to cancel noise, to understand what is truly important today and what maybe was important yesterday, but needs to be lower on the priorities right now. And I do believe that some people who had the capacity to be in senior leadership roles in the past will not have that capacity in the future. It'll be a select few, a fewer number that actually possess these capabilities. The other thing that I think it rises to a higher level is people connection. Integrity is a number one asset, understanding how to build trust, how to maintain trust, what destroys trust, how to be approachable, the proactive communication, to be a purpose-driven leader and to maintain that continuity so it's real to the people that are following. And I also would just add one other thing is that we used to read about these different flavors of CEOs. We had the startup CEO, the growth CEO, the one that does operations improvement, and the one that does turnarounds. And I think these concepts of the past are concepts of the past. I think you have to be able to do all of them because it shifts day to day, what's important, year to year, and you have to be able to do all these things within a single leader.
Thank you, Dr. Kaplan. That is, you gave a really great list of those skills that we need to look at cultivating in 2025. Dennis, Pam, anything that you'd add to that? Any other perspectives?
The one thing that I really kind of think about is effective communication. We definitely talked about communication. And I think in the hybrid work environment that we have today, trying to have effective communication is very different than it has been in the past. Connecting with people when you're not with them face to face, and maybe body language and things of that nature aren't able to be seen. And so really being an effective communicator, which actually includes active listening, right? And so making sure that you're listening to understand. Zoom meetings and things of that nature are great, but it does not allow, sometimes you can, as a leader, something might catch your eye on your screen as you're trying to talk to someone, and it's really being present in the moment in that hybrid environment that I think is really important so you can develop those relationships and have that effective communication. Really
helpful. Thank you, Pam. Well, good. Well, let's move on to the next question. And I wanted to share a little bit from a report by PwC. This was also a recent report in 2024 that states that over 70% of CEOs expect artificial intelligence to be a game changer for their businesses in 2025. However, only 30% feel confident in their ability to train leaders effectively in this area. So they know that AI is going to be a big part of their business, but they don't necessarily know how to equip their leaders with these skills. So I'd like to pose a question to the panel on, with AI being a pivotal tool in leadership, how is your organization equipping leaders to leverage AI? What are some of the things that you're doing to help prepare them, train them to leverage this new, I shouldn't say new, this technology that continues to emerge on a rapid level? And I want to ask Pam to answer this question first.
Yeah, thank you. So absolutely, AI is becoming really important to all of us. And I think what we need to equip our leaders with is understanding the power of AI. So one of the things that we did earlier this fall at Church Mutual is we put an innovation jam together, where we brought in 24 of our leaders throughout the company in all spaces in leadership, as well as different parts of our organization. We brought them together and we asked them to identify a few issues that are in the company, that we have in the company today. So I think there was 6 teams of 4. They came with these issues prior to the day. And we brought in a third party that kind of started the day off with saying, this is kind of some of the things that AI can do, because I think we have to help leaders imagine the power of AI and what that can bring to their everyday life and how it can kind of affect some of those things. So we gave them some examples of how AI has been used in our industry or in business, and just kind of get them thinking through some of the things. And then we asked them to go workshop their individual issues and think about it. And maybe AI is an answer and maybe it's not, right? And so making sure that we had them work through and come up with some solutions, whether it was AI driven or just driven through other things that we needed to think through from a leadership perspective. And then they presented their issues, kind of like a Shark Tank, and we did come through with a winner. And then we're piloting that issue and there's some use of AI in there's some use of, other leadership factors that we can bring forward to help solve that issue. And so working with a smaller group with that one issue from an AI perspective, and kind of working through that. So more to follow on the success of that, but I really think it is just giving them time and space to really imagine what AI can do and how it can kind of solve some of their issues.
So great. I love that jam. I told Pam they should trademark that because I think it's a really clever way. But Pam, just a follow-up question. When you think back to this experiment and what you're attempting to do, was there any learnings from that? Anything that you maybe were surprised by, either pleasantly surprised or maybe constructively surprised that these are things that we didn't anticipate and perhaps should have? Any lessons learned from that experience?
Yeah, I think it's just giving people some time and space, away, and allowing them to spend a day to work on that, and then letting the creative juices flow from there, and having them kind of think through that, and then understanding as they take that away, how can that affect other issues or problems or issues that they're dealing with. So I think pleasantly surprised at allowing people that opportunity to think through it and watching their creative juices flow and coming up with good solutions to these issues. Some of the issues are long-standing issues, right? Too many meetings was kind of one of them. And
Yeah.
I think we can all say, yeah, we all have too many meetings. How do we solve that? If we could only have AI solve it. And so some of them can't be solved strictly through AI. There's culture changes and other things that have to come into play, but understanding where AI can play in and play an important role was definitely worthwhile for that day.
It's amazing if you just provide the space and the time, which time is such a precious commodity. It's gotten even more so as Dr. Kaplan mentioned earlier. So just providing that space and time, which again, a lot of us don't have. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that story and that example. So I'd like to move on to the next question, and want to share a little bit of a report from the Rising Storm. This is a report by Lightcast. Lightcast is the worldwide authority on labor market data, and they emphasize the silver tsunami, which of course we've been hearing about for some time. The scary fact is that 80% of the 5 million workers who exited the workforce since 2021 were over the age of 55. That's 4 million workers that have left the workforce that were over the age of 55. So given this continued acceleration of baby boomer retirements, I'd like to ask the panel how your organizations are preparing for the almost certain leadership voids that we're facing today, but certainly will continue to be accelerated in the coming years. So I'd like to call on Dennis to answer this question first, and then of course I'll open up to the rest for any of their comments. So Dennis.
Great question, John, and great article for those of you that may not have read it already. I'm sure many companies are dealing with this challenge. At Blaine's, John, we took a very systematic approach. First, we reviewed our demographic data and identified those positions where we had risk of losing talent due to retirement. Second, we looked at the potential talent pools we had internally and externally that we could use to fill those positions in the future. Third, we identified potential successors internally and assessed the skill gaps that they had versus those required in the at-risk positions, and then started looking externally as well. Last, we designed and implemented programs to support the development of potential successors for these key positions. The two biggest position challenges were finding potential successors for our regional store managers and our store managers. While these may not sound like very glamorous titles, these jobs were critical to the success of the business, since we learned our sales go down whenever either of those two positions were vacant. So we needed to develop a pool of ready now leaders to fill these positions when they came open. The vast majority of our leaders in key roles, like regional store managers and store managers, were over 50 years old, and we were planning to grow, and we just didn't have the talent to fill the roles that we needed in current and new stores. So we created development programs for our regional store managers and store managers. As one example, we created a regional store manager and training program and identified high potential store managers to participate in the program. The program consists of training on multi-unit retail operations that was provided by a third party, then on-the-job training by shadowing their regional store manager and regionals from other regions by visiting other stores to learn what they do on the job and get exposure to different approaches from the different regional store managers. Then they take responsibility for overseeing another store in their region so that they get the experience assessing store performance, learning the leader and the team, conducting store visits, and providing feedback on how to improve sales and store operations and attract and development talent, all the while managing their own store. This phase is basically learning how to prioritize and juggle multiple responsibilities, which is what they do in their own job, but also regional store managers have to do. After that, we let them take over for the regional store manager when they were on vacation or even during an extended leave in order to gain additional experience in leading all stores in the region. This is a process that extends over 12 to 18 months, and at each phase, the regional store managers in training receive feedback on what they're doing well and could do even better. And John, we use a very similar approach for all other positions for our home office functions, including our information technology group, the merchant group, marketing, finance, and even HR, among other functions. So that's our approach, John.
Thank you, Dennis. It's very comprehensive, and thank you for sharing the details. I'm sure our audience appreciates that. What maybe has, and I don't know if it's too early to comment on this, but I'm curious on the outcomes. So is Blaine's seeing the outcomes that you had hoped for? Maybe again, some of the lessons learned. Folks are always looking for maybe what to avoid, as they're trying to replicate these types of processes. So comments on either of those?
Yeah, thanks, John. Great question. So we started this program when I joined Blaine 8 years ago, and I would say it was a slow and iterative start. We had to kind of test and learn. So a lesson learned for others going forward is the sooner you can get a program up and developed, the faster you can learn and the more you can improve it. Now, in terms of results, we have 3 people in the program now. They're all doing very well. One is very advanced. She started in the program 8 years ago. She is roundly viewed as a high potential talent and ready now to become a regional store manager. The challenge with her is she was only available because she had kind of planted due to home and family in one area. So she was only available to replace her regional store manager. The second challenge we had was identifying others, because typically these are high performers in our largest stores. So if you pull one of them, then you have a liability for that store manager. So it's a domino effect of making sure you have not only the person developed to fulfill the regional store manager job, but somebody that can backfill them when we decide to move them. So we've got at least all our succession plans set up now. And in fact, the one person I talked about will probably be moving her into the role sometime after the first of the year. We've got her successor backed up, so it's a really nice setup we have. At least it was before I retired from the role, John. So we'll see what happens.
Well, hopefully you trained your successor well, Dennis, and they're going to continue the momentum that you've started there.
Yeah, I was privileged to have a great team. Thank you, John.
Yeah, yeah. Pam, when we were preparing for the call, you had, I think, a really interesting point that maybe a lot of our audience can relate to, which is more of the I'm sorry, and let me just go back to my notes here. I just lost my thought on the challenges of developing leaders in a hybrid work environment. That's what you had shared. Some of the challenges of, now many of us are in a hybrid work environment where we're working from home and from the office. So could you comment on perhaps how you've overcome that challenge or what you're doing at Church Mutual?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. I would say the learning through osmosis, right? They could hear things through the cube walls as people were talking. That has kind of gone to the wayside. We're trying to get people back to the office and have teams of people in the office on the same day so that some of that learning can happen, but it needs to happen outside and into the hybrid environment too. And so there's a lot of use of, teams and chats and things of that nature to get people involved in that space. Leadership cohorts where we bring people together both virtually as well as in person. So we give them some development, training maybe outside of what they would get in their day-to-day job positions. But it's really being mindful that learning through osmosis is not available, and how do you get people together to fill those knowledge gaps that we're seeing as people retire or leave. And so it's being very mindful of it as a leader and making sure you think through different opportunities and strategies to fill those gaps that may have been there when we were all together in the office.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Pam. I just, between hearing you and Dennis both, this is a major body of work. I mean, this is a lot of time and effort and planning that organizations, and you can see why some organizations do this well, and because they're dedicating resources, they're making it a priority where others perhaps aren't. And I like to think that investment will obviously have huge returns as we enter this point of, again, major exits and not having leaders prepared. So, Alan, anything you'd want to add?
Yeah, so I thought the formality that Blaine's has exercised is really phenomenal. And so I have nothing to add to that. But what I would say is, when you do have strong internal programs, I think as leaders, as you're developing as leaders, to keep in mind, this is not a function you just delegate to HR. Leaders have to be tightly involved. And one of the things that we found is we develop leaders, if there's no room for them to grow, then they're at high risk for leaving and being recruited away. So that's the flip side of developing your leadership team. Now, one would argue if you're developing leaders, you care about them and they're more likely to stay. But to reinforce that, I think it's really important, and I find myself spending more and more time doing this over the last few years, is not only spending more time with your direct reports in coaching and mentoring, but doing manager once removed rounds to your high potential employees to let them know you have eyes on them, that when opportunity comes up, you're going to be thinking about them, and that as an organization, you really care about them and you're focused on them.
It's really good counsel, Alan. Thank you.
Yeah, John, could I just piggyback on Alan's
Yeah,
response?
please.
I just want to, Alan, what you just mentioned is absolutely critical, and why you're such a great CEO along with Pam. Establishing that emotional connection with other people in the organization beyond your directs is like the glue that will make people stick to your company. Because I know, wow, the CEO talked to me. I'm going to stay with this organization. They believe in me, and I want to continue my career here. And frankly, attract others because they're going to tell everybody what a great place it is. That's it.
Great punctuation of that, Dennis. Thank you so much. All right, well, let's move to the next question. That same report, and thanks for Brooke for putting that into the chat. If you didn't notice that, the article that I referenced is in the chat now. But that same report highlighted a notable disparity between the skills of the current workforce and the demands of available roles. Particularly, we see that in the trade, the service, and the healthcare sectors. This mismatch requires leadership that can think about driving reskilling and upskilling initiatives on top of, again, all of their other responsibilities. So I'd like to ask the panel, how are you preparing and equipping your leaders to identify, because that's step one, and then secondly, address those skill gaps within their teams? And since I mentioned healthcare in particular, I'd like to call on Dr. Kaplan to answer this question first.
Sure. So there's two different ways to answer this question. One is leadership development in our leaders and where there might be gaps in skills in the current workforce. But I'm going to take it a different way, and it's the workforce challenges in getting a skilled workforce together. Your technologists, your manufacturing specialists, your technology specialists. And so one of the things as leaders, as we develop leaders, is to have them think about the work, changing the work and the workforce into the future, knowing that you can't just do the same old things over and over and expect that to work in the future. It's not anymore just about recruitment and retention. You got to almost manufacture your own workforce. You have to think about how can we change the work to require less workers or do the work differently. And so there's new rules of the road. And of course, there's new technologies and so forth. So we have to train our leaders, people on this webinar, ourselves, to rethink of work and workforce as just kind of a core thing we do to how we think about it strategically going forward, what it's going to look like in 5 years and 10 years. And as an example, related to two things we've talked about, one is ambient listening. We're changing the way we do work. We know that our physicians are overwhelmed with the patient requests and what most people know is my chart. We know that the documentation is difficult, and we've implemented AI to do ambient listening. It listens to the doctor and the patient in the room and writes the chart up and checks off all the requirements required for charting and billing and so forth. And we've used AI to answer patient inquiries on my chart, only disappointingly to find out that patients found that AI was much more empathetic than the doctors. And that is true. The studies have shown that. And then we've developed apprenticeship programs to start training our own nurses and medical technicians and ophthalmology technicians and so pharmacy techs. So we need to train our leaders how to think different about the workforce of the future.
Really helpful, Alan. Thank you so much. You had mentioned that you are actually the largest entity or organization in Wisconsin for apprenticeships, which I thought was really fascinating. That was a new fact for me. Is there anything that you might share related to that work that you do at UW Health?
Sure. We started, back in 2017 because we had a shortage of medical assistants. So we started a program. It requires a certain amount of education and a certification afterwards. And what we learned is that 90% of the people who enrolled in it identified as BIPOC. We had a 98% success rate in graduation certification, and 100% of the people stayed with us. And so here we're elevating communities and families and giving opportunity. And we were just energized by this. Then COVID came along. We had an acute workforce shortage, and we just expanded that to pharmacy techs, ophthalmology techs, respiratory therapy, nursing. And a lot of the people who graduated the first program went on for the higher level programs. And so we have hundreds of people in these apprenticeships. We've been fortunate. A lot of it's either grant funded by the state, federal government, and by philanthropy. Some of it is our cost, but the return on investment is fantastic. And so we're not done. We're going to keep growing this.
That's excellent. And we all know the impact of retention. And if those folks are staying longer, that's a huge asset, obviously, and a huge plus. So Dennis or Pam, anything that you might want to add to this reskilling, upskilling question?
John, I thought Alan had a great response. I think the only thing I would add, career development and opportunities are a two-way street. So you may have people in your organization you want to identify and move up the food chain, but you need to find out from the employee, where do they want to go with their career? And then how can you support them? So when I started, I'm sure Alan and Pam have these programs, but when I started at Blaine's, we introduced a talent review and individual development plans so that people could define, where do I want to go with my career in the next year and in the next 3 to 5 years? What skills or experience do I need to develop? And then we required that managers meet with employees to go through that plan, try to give them realistic feedback. Could be maybe you're too ambitious or you're not ambitious enough. We think very highly of you and want to move you up. Then we followed that with getting information on associates' potential and their performance and kind of put them in a performance potential matrix and then talked about them. We would have each function leader meet with their leadership team and go through every employee in the function. And then we would follow up with the individual so that we could let them know where they stand, which they found really valuable. They'd never gotten that feedback before. And then how the manager could support the employee's development. And truth be told, 85% of the responsibility is on the employee for that development plan. But we believe that managers have to help by providing opportunity. So about 10% falls on the manager and then about 5% on HR to make sure we have the tools and the process ready to support them. That's it for
It's really helpful, Dennis. I think that's a struggle. I think back to my HR career, and I almost sometimes was inverted from those percentages. And I think about our earlier conversation about allowing the time and space. Pam, it was with your jam or example earlier, and development feels similarly. That if we expect employees or leaders to own their development, we do need to provide the time and space for them to develop as well. And that's a real challenge, again, with workload and the upskilling and the turnover and the succession. I mean, there's just a lot on people's plates, and yet I think as organizations, if we're serious about this, we need to think about how we provide the time and space for leaders and individuals to develop themselves and own their development. To your point, Dennis, completely agree with that. Well, let's move to the next question. There's a growing emphasis on developing leaders who are equipped to create sustainable, positive change in their organizations and communities. And the focus is continuing to move from profit to purpose. There's a research from Deloitte, and we can share this article as well, that highlights that organizations led by purpose-driven leaders outperform their peers in employee engagement, innovation, and societal contributions. Again, that was Deloitte, the Global Trends Report of 2023. So I'd like to ask the panel, what role do you see leadership development programs playing in equipping the next generation of leaders to drive sustainable, positive change within their organizations and communities? And Pam, I'd like to call on you first to give us your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. So working at Church Mutual, for where our tagline is protecting the greater good, we do attract a lot of mission-based, folks that want to work for Church Mutual. And so this is a very big piece of our culture. It's a very big piece of our puzzle. work with insureds in the religious institutions as well as not-for-profits and schools, camps, all of the areas that, our employees really work with these insureds on a daily basis to protect their businesses, protect their people, and protect their employees. And so they take that mission to heart. And so for me as a leader, it's understanding that we have a mission-based company, we have a mission-based organization, and that's really ingrained in our culture, and understanding how important that is to us. But on the next side, we do have a business to run, and sometimes there's difficult decisions that we have to make, even though we are working to protect the greater good. And so for me, it's a very much of a balance between working on and understanding the mission and working through all of that, and then on the flip side, having to make some business decisions that may not feel like we're always protecting the greater good, but the message is much broader than that, right? We have to make some of these business decisions so we can be a sustainable business moving forward for the greater good. So it is definitely a balance in our organization, given that we are a very mission-driven company and definitely attract those people to come to work for us. So it's not something that as a leadership team we need to push. It's definitely something we just need to understand and balance and make sure that we have the right balance around all of the mission and the profits.
It's really helpful, Pam. Follow-up question to you on that. Since this is around leadership development, how does that look developmentally for leaders at Church Mutual? How do you, because they're really ultimately going to help navigate that tension that you described. So would you have any examples to share of how you've developed that skill set for your leaders?
Yeah, it's definitely working with the leaders and having them understand both sides of it, right? That they can really understand the business aspect and the why behind why we have to make some of these decisions versus, the day-to-day, protecting the greater good conversation. And so it's really bringing them in, having them really understand why we're making the decisions that we're making and how it's going to impact. It's generally a small portion of our policyholders. Sometimes we have to make some tough decisions on, but then it is to protect the larger group. It's kind of your 80-20 rule, but it's even less than that. So it's how do we sometimes have to make tough decisions, but protect the greater good from that perspective. And it's really about being transparent so that they can understand the greater business purpose behind it and why we have to make some of these decisions. If you look at them one by one, they make them very difficult. But when you see them as a whole picture, I think that helps our leaders be able to tell that story and be able to communicate that message to folks as they have to, go and execute on some of the plans that we have.
Well, and I'm guessing that you could probably give many examples where that connects back to the mission, because if you hadn't made those hard business decisions, you'd maybe not have the resources to continue to fulfill your mission. So they're not mutually exclusive, right? Yeah.
Yes. And that's the message that we're, working with our leaders. And it is basic transparency and understanding so that they can go communicate and execute on the plans.
It's excellent. Excellent. Alan, I think you wanted to share something on this point as well, or this question.
Yeah, so I wholly agree with what Pam said, and in that difficulty in balance. And certainly we hire people that will support the mission. We don't like sharp elbows at the table, and we don't like people to be overly focused on their own growth in their own careers. If they're focused on the mission, they will grow. And if they're capable and do well. So that's my advice to everyone. But here's what I wanted to share is that it's easy as a leader to run afoul of this principle of being mission-minded. And so I grew up as a physician. I did a residency program in emergency medicine. I practiced as an emergency physician. I know what it's like to be in that care room. I know what it's like to work with our nurses, our patients, our families. I am a high empathy person. However, 30 years later, I am working as a CEO of an organization, and Pam talked about those competing priorities. So I found myself talking more about the financial performance, about market share, and using words that did not connect to those who come into healthcare because they're mission-minded. And I started getting criticism back that we wish you were more like the doctor you were trained to be than some businessman, because we have plenty of businessmen out there. And so I didn't lose my empathy. I didn't lose my mission-minded focus. I was balancing and thinking, what do we need to survive and execute on our mission? But the language I used was not being perceived as such. So it's something that you should watch the people you're developing, but also yourself. In the example you said of how to exhibit, how to communicate that mission-mindedness.
Yeah, thanks for your willingness to share that, because I'm sure there's many leaders that are listening to this that are nodding their heads with that real challenge. So thank you for demonstrating some vulnerability there, Alan. We appreciate that. Well, we're going to have one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to some questions. There are some questions already that you've entered into the Q&A and into the chat. I've seen those be coming in. If you have additional questions, feel free to put those in. We'll get to as many as we can. But this last question I want to actually have everyone on the panel respond to, and it's around leadership transitions. We know that these transitions of leadership often bring unique challenges and opportunities. And I want you each to comment on, thinking back to your own experiences, what's maybe one leadership transition that really stood out to you? And probably most importantly, how did that shape the way that you develop other leaders? So Dennis, can I call on you to comment on this first?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, John. It's another great question. While I've had a lot of leadership transitions, three stick out in my mind, and they all involve the same situation. They all involve going into a senior level HR or a CHR role in a new company. When I moved from Limited Brands to Senior Vice President of HR at Victoria's Secret Stores, then to CHRO at the Vitamix Corporation and Blaine's, I had to kind of use the same skills and knowledge that I learned in other positions. So changing companies, even if it's in the same position in a larger or smaller company, brings on similar challenges. You have to get to know the leadership team you're working with, learn the industry and the organization and the business strategy, and most important, learn the current function strategy, what's working, what's not, and learn the team and develop the new strategy with them. So I've used the lessons from these transitions to help me develop my leaders by teaching others to take the time to get to know their team and their team members' aspirations, strengths, and opportunities. Then I demonstrate support for their career development by challenging them to take on a new important projects with some degree of risk to help them learn how to deal with pressure or stress on the job, supporting them to develop the skills they need to advance their career, then always doing a one-on-one after action review and discuss with them what they felt worked well and what they felt they could have done even better, and then conclude that discussion with celebrating their success and preparing them for next. As an example, when I started at Blaine's, we conducted the first ever company-wide engagement survey. I assigned 3 team members to do the analysis of our first engagement survey results, create the charts and the presentation, and participate in the presentation of the results to our board of directors. None of them had ever done that before. I made sure they understood what our goal was, that helped them develop the skills to compile and analyze the results, and made sure they were prepared to answer questions 2 to 3 levels below what was simply presented on the charts and in the graphs. Clearly, this was a potentially intimidating project for them, but I supported them in preparing for the presentation, then watching them as they did a dry run for their portion of the presentation, then watched as they presented their sections of the results to the board. And after presentation, we debriefed on that, what worked well and what could they have done even better. And then we celebrated their success. I believe that that helped them develop new skills, gain self-awareness, and develop confidence. But what really made me happy was that each person went on to get promoted and take on more responsibility in the organization.
The ultimate reward, right? Yeah. Thank you, Dennis. Pam or Ellen, who'd like to comment next?
Sure.
All right.
So I transitioned from a chief medical officer of a single suburban hospital in Naperville, Illinois, Edward Hospital, to becoming the chief clinical officer of what was then Iowa Health System, now Unity Point Health. So it was 9 regions across 3 states, rural environments, urban environments. And I might as well have been Darth Vader when I walked into that system, just a city boy coming into a country environment. And it was clear I was not super welcome. And unfortunately, one of the medical groups, there were many, many medical groups in all the regions and individual contracts. One of them found out I was going to be their CEO in an announcement in Modern Healthcare. They weren't even told by my boss. So that's how I started. And so I did a lot of windshield time. I got in my car, I visited everybody with the thought that everyone has something to add, to contribute. And I went to the small rural environments, I went to the city environments, and I spent a lot of time listening. Then I built a physician leadership academy so we could take people from different regions, because they were xenophobic. They all hated each other, and they were all better than each other until they saw the data. And they, so I got them learning together, leading together, and that led to my ability to bring them together to create the medical group, the single medical group across all 3 states and 9 regions. If they took what they liked and they didn't like about their current situation, created the ultimate medical group, which we call New Group, and 1,000 doctors came together into one organization. And that exists today as Unity Point Clinic. You can look it up, and I became the CEO of that. And what it taught me, and I didn't do it because I was brilliant, I did it because I was scared. I didn't know what to do. So I just went out and started listening. And what I learned, I come to UW Health, which is now an academic center with a completely different makeup of individuals and mindsets, and just use the same principles, just that listening, active listening, walking around, getting to know people, asking people who else I should talk to get to the informal network. And as Pam pointed out, much more difficult to do in the hybrid environment, but you got to get out there and you got to have that face-to-face time.
Thank you, Ellen. Pam.
Yeah. So as I thought about this question, there's plenty of leadership transitions that I've been through, but the big one that kind of sticks out in my head is pretty general, but it's when I had to start leading leaders, right? So when I was when I was leading individual contributors, not 9 times out of 10, I did that job. I knew how to do the job. I knew how to do every aspect of that position. So it was, in my mind, an easier transition. But once you start leading leaders and maybe haven't done that position or aren't familiar with exactly how they do their day-to-day, that was a very tough leadership transition. Just understanding that I don't know how to do that job. How can I lead them? And at that point, as I was preparing for this, I knew I'm going to date myself a little bit, and I probably need a different analogy. But at that point, someone had mentioned to me, like, even Tiger Woods has a golf coach. That person can't golf better than Tiger Woods, right? What he's doing, they can see the broader picture. They can watch him do things that he can't see when he's swinging the golf club. And so having that in the back of my mind, that I can see things that they can't see, or I have a broader picture in my head that I can see things to help them navigate and help them be the best leader that they can be, as well as myself, was a big lesson learned for me in my career. And I think that in my head a lot. Even when you get a little nervous about, even Tiger Woods has a golf coach. So let's try to figure out how we can lead these leaders. Bringing that into a new role at Church Mutual just 18 months ago was definitely one of those other big transitions that I had to continue to think about. I think the active listening that Alan talks about is just trying to listen to understand and see how you can use other experiences that you've had in your past and bring them to those leaders. So for me, I share that story a lot when I see leaders be a little nervous about maybe stepping into that new role or trying to understand, as be vulnerable about, hey, I felt like that before. I understand how you're feeling, and this is how I work through that. I probably need a new analogy these days, but every good golfer has a golf coach, maybe, or something like that. But for me, it's just being vulnerable and leaning into folks when they start to get into those new roles and understanding how some of those transitions will be really difficult.
Well, thank you, Pam, and thank you all for sharing those very personal stories. They're always inspiring to new leaders and experienced leaders alike. So always walk away with something learned and a lesson that we can apply. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience and some of the questions that they submitted, or that you all submitted. And Pam, actually, the first one is for you, and it ties with your InnoJam that you mentioned earlier. The person was interested to know if you created a governing policy and any restrictions that your industry, obviously being the insurance industry, that you needed to consider as a part of that activity and exercise.
Yeah, even prior to the InnoJam, given insurance highly regulated environment, we have created a governing policy and a governing body around AI that was very active in developing this InnoJam. So putting the guardrails in place that we needed to have. In order to use some AI, there's probably some things out there that we have to limit ourselves at, given the regulations and things of that nature. So we do have a governing body in place that was in place prior to the InnoJam, and actually we're the ones that created the structure around it. So very important to start there at the governing policies and that governing body, so that you can understand what you can and cannot use from an AI perspective in our industry. I'm sure all others as well.
I was going to say, this is probably a good lesson if you would want to go down this to really think about governance and security. Again, I think no matter what, because I think people aren't necessarily thinking, and it's like any technology. I mean, what you put in, has to go somewhere, and so just thinking about the security of what you're entering in to AI. The next question I would just open up to anyone. And the question is, what are the 2025 competencies that you see as most important for leaders to leverage? So we've talked about a lot of competencies. We've talked a lot about skills. But if you were to narrow it down to the most important, let's say top three, what would you all say to be kind of the top competencies that you would want to see focused on, or an organization to focus on in 2025? Anyone want to get us started with that question?
Well, I guess I'll jump in.
Thank you, Alan.
And so it's something I mentioned before. There's so much technology out there. AI is the big one. These shiny objects. We have these businesses to run, and that ability to cancel the noise. And I'll take it a step further and steady the organization. So you have a strategy, and the strategy needs to be executed. And we need to reassess that strategy in real time. There's no such thing as a 5-year strategic plan anymore. It's a 3-year plan and real-time reassessment. But the noise will zigzag the organization and it'll lose focus. And so I think it's really important to study the organization. You build the skills to decide when the noise around you, the shiny objects, are something you should adopt and is something you should parking lot. And AI is a perfect example. When it furthers strategy, like ambient listening that I mentioned, it is an executable tool to further strategy. Otherwise, it will distract you. And so I think that's an important skill set. It's more important as the noise gets louder.
Thank you, Alan. Pam, Dennis?
John, I can maybe add on to a couple of things. I thought Alan had a great list. I tentatively, as he was talking, labeled my thoughts care. So first is curiosity, to always be looking for what's next, what's working and not working in the business, what's out there on the business horizon with your competitors. And that then you have to focus. So I kind of combine those. You can be curious all day, like ADD or something, but you've got to really focus in on once you've been curious, what do I need to focus on? Agility is the A. You've got to be prepared to be very agile. A recent article indicated, most leadership teams dealt with maybe 4 or 5 things at any one time 10 years ago. It's more than double that now. I mean, you think about the pandemic, global tensions, energy shifts, and things like that. It's much, much more challenging. Third is reflection, kind of reflecting on where you've been, getting back to where your strategy is, what do we need to adjust, and then developing that plan for going forward. Business strategy is like any, sports game program, right? You have a game plan, you go in and everything changes. So you have to start to pivot to what's needed or capitalize on some strengths and correct some opportunities. And then finally, engagement. If you're not constantly engaging everybody from the top down, I loved Alan's 1-over-1s, you've got to keep that next level and frankly, the next level engaged, because a lot gets lost in the communication. And I would say, try this out for you leaders on the phone, that old telephone game. Try it out in your teams and start with the statement if you've got 5 or 10 people, and see if the statement you get back from the last person is the same thing that you shared. I doubt it's going to be, and it can be awfully different and kind of make everybody acutely aware about how important it is to stay engaged and stay on the same page.
Impressed that you came up with that little acronym so quickly. That was great. Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, John. Alan, that is not drug induced, just so you're aware. So,
Pam, anything that you'll add to the great examples that have already been shared?
I don't know that I have much to add to that. I think those are great examples. Yeah. Resiliency, I think, is the biggest piece. And vulnerability, I think, is really important as a leader. And where you don't get it right, call it. We didn't get it right, and we start over and we try again. And being vulnerable to failure, I think, is something that's really important as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. Well, we're going to wrap it up. I have just a few announcements, but before I do that, we did put some recommended books and articles, additional ones, in the chat. I certainly encourage you. Some of those you may be familiar with, but some might be new. Thanks to our panelists for those recommendations. So please check that out. And then I wanted to just share a couple upcoming CPED programs. We always want to use this opportunity to share what's coming up. So if we can go to the next slide, we have our transition to executive management. We kind of refer to this as our mini MBA program. And this covers kind of the core executive leadership competencies and topics. So you can read more about that on our website. That starts in March, and it is a fantastic program and really ties to what Pam was talking about earlier of kind of moving to be a leader of leaders and the change that transition really experiences. Next, we have the Emerging Leaders Academy. This is for frontline leaders that you might have in your organization. This is going to be a hybrid, completely online, but hybrid between asynchronous or on demand, and then there will be some synchronous or live online sessions. A great program featuring some competencies that we feel are necessary for emerging leaders or new leaders. So that could be definitely tied into some of your succession planning work that you might be having in your organization. And then finally, I want to mention our coaching packages. So we do have 6, 9, and 12-hour coaching packages. Those are often, the coaches are definitely within our network. Many of those are instructors in our programs, and they love to do executive and leadership coaching as well. So definitely check that out if you're interested. We have some particular ones on our artificial intelligence, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, on strategy, and career and leadership. So please check those out as well. Well, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Dr. Kaplan. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Pam, for just all of the incredible input and thoughts that you shared today. I'm inspired. I'm sure our audience is inspired as well. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for serving our great state of Wisconsin with all of your corporations and companies. And we will look forward to seeing all of you at future webinars.